Welcome to the Deloitte annual budget brief. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nikhil Hira. I am a partner with the firm and I head up the tax practice for East Africa, which for us covers the 5 traditional East African countries: Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi. It covers Ethiopia, and from the 1st of June is also covering South Sudan, which we're now in the process of setting up. How many of you have been nominated or appointed withholding VAT agents? Well, I'm sorry to hear that because it's a real pain. Even Deloitte has been appointed withholding VAT agent, and it's a lot of hard work, a lot of administration.
The question should be, how many of you affected with
I was coming to that as well, because not only do some of us have to deduct it, but others of us are actually suffering because we move into a refund position as a result. And by the way, you cannot get under our law currently a refund if the refund is arising because of withholding VAT. You can only get it if you're a zero-rated supplier. For those of you who don't know what withholding VAT is, you're probably very lucky. It's not something you really want to dwell on. But basically, when I invoice you and you pay me, and pay me, you've got to pay me as quickly as possible, by the way. That's part of the deal now. So when you pay me, and I've charged you 16 VAT, you pay me only the 10 VAT, and you give 6 to the Revenue Authority, and you give me a certificate to say that you've done that. That 16, I also pay. So the Revenue Authority from that one transaction of 100 is getting 22 of VAT until I claim back the 6 from the certificate that you've given me. The point of withholding VAT was that they wanted to expand the tax net. It is a complete nonsense, I'm afraid, because there is no point in trying to expand the tax net from people who are already in the tax net. Because if I'm charging VAT, I must be in the tax net. So what they're trying to achieve by this, I can't see, I don't understand, and I've written many an article about it, but it's all falling on deaf ears, because the KRA and the Treasury believe that it's the best thing since sliced bread. But I totally disagree with them. Now, what happened was they had it in the mid-2000s, and at that time you withheld the full 16. It was stopped about 2011-12. And then 2014 it was reintroduced with this 6 instead of 16, but the only withholding VAT agents were government ministries, government agencies, that sort of thing, and parastatals effectively. In the 2015 budget, the Finance Act came up with giving the power to the Commissioner to appoint whoever he wants as a withholding VAT agent. And indeed, that's how a number of you got appointed. In January this year, the new Tax Procedures Act came out, and in the Tax Procedures Act, inadvertently, they deleted the provision relating to withholding VAT in the VAT Act. So the question then arose, well, if it's deleted by the Tax Procedures Act, does that mean we can cease to be withholding VAT agents? Which would be the logical assumption. There's obviously the legal question as to whether the Tax Procedures Act can actually amend some other act, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to try and comment on that. I'm sure a lot of lawyers here have got views on that, and you probably won't want to share it because you want to earn some fees for giving an opinion, but it seems to me illogical and doesn't make a lot of sense. But having done that, the Revenue Authority issued a public notice and said, yes, we know it's been deleted, but it's still applicable. So there's the question of the legality of whether it's still applicable, whether it's legal to have deleted it, and B, whether it's legal to assume that it's still there when it is deleted. So they threatened that they would bring it back, and indeed the Finance Bill has brought it back. And it is back in the VAT Act and in the Tax Procedures Act, but retrospectively to the 1st of January 2016. Which means if you stop doing it after the Tax Procedures Act came out, you're still liable for it. Again, there's a legal question here as to whether we can actually backdate and bring in a tax retrospectively. I actually feel that it's the wrong thing to do. We've seen precedents in other parts of the world, to name India, who have this big argument with Vodafone about retrospectively introducing a tax on a transaction that they'd already done. And I don't think it's a good message to be giving business and investors coming to the country. But unfortunately, as of today, that's the fact. So if you're a withholding VAT agent, you should be applying it. If you haven't been, you're at risk that you might get caught out. If you haven't been since the 9th of January 16, the possibility is that the Revenue Authority will come and assess you for it. So be prepared for that. When they do come and assess you, let me know. We'll try and fight them at that stage. Okay, so let's look at a quick look at the budget and its overview. Infrastructure, we're seeing continued investment. The standard gauge railway is expected to be up and running by June next year. Very good timing, of course, given that there's an election in August. I understand it's going to stop in Naivasha. The next stage, I guess, will come later. But there is some question about whether it's now going to go to Kigali or not going to go to Kigali, and whether it's going to come through Tanzania, etc. So it may have lost some of its benefit as a result of that. That remains to be seen. Power generation and access, again, got a good amount of allocation. Incidentally, in the last 3 years, this government has increased power by 615 megawatts. We're now sitting at around about 2,250 megawatts of power being generated. Their aim was to get to 5,000 megawatts by 2017. I don't think that's going to happen, but we've certainly made a lot of progress. Road networks, we're seeing it. The Western Bypass is coming up soon. Other roads are being built. Harbors and airports got a lot. Don't know what happened to JKIA and its second terminal, but anyway, airports. But a lot of the outlying towns, Isiolo, Chogo, etc., are getting new airports or completely new airports. Security, which obviously has been a big problem for the country, particularly with the incidents of terrorism. A fair amount of money was allocated to it. To my mind, probably not enough, but it includes building up new houses for the police and the armed forces, which is coming through with funding from the AFDB. And there's going to be vehicle acquisition and that sort of thing. Agricultural and industrial transformation, I'm disappointed that we didn't really allocate a lot to agriculture. Agriculture continues to be the backbone of our economy, and we're actually not really spending as much as we should on it, and I'll show you that in a second. Youth and women, which is a stated aim of the Jubilee government. So the WESO Fund and the Youth Women Enterprise Fund has been given allocations. Education, free primary and secondary education, sanitary for girls in schools, digital literacy program. In fact, the laptop project has sort of kicked off. I understand from what the minister said that 11,500 laptops have now been issued to Standard 1 kids. I said before, and I'll say again, that while I think this is a very good thing to do to technologize us, digitalize us, I'm not sure that the plan is right, because putting laptops into schools which don't have a roof makes little sense to me and don't have electricity. So I think maybe our priority has gone slightly wrong, but we do have to move into the 21st century, and that's what we're doing. Health, continued free maternal health care, scaled up supply of medical equipment to hospitals as well, all that within the budget. So this is where your money is going, or the government's money is going. Infrastructure and ICT are taking a fairly big chunk over there, as you can see. And the green line is last year, or the estimated spend to 30th of June, and the blue line is the budget. So as you can see, a big amount has been earmarked for energy and ICT. If you go about halfway down, you'll see agriculture and rural urban development there. Sorry, I don't know if you can see it there. And you can see there's not much spent on that, which seems to me, given that it's still the backbone of our economy, seems to be a slightly misguided, and maybe a rethink is required on that front. So that's where your money is going. Where is it coming from? Well, your sources of revenue, income tax. Again, income tax, which would include PAYE, personal tax, corporate tax, withholding taxes, etc., is bringing in the lion's share. VAT is still not doing as well as I would have liked it to do. It seems to me as a consumption tax, it should really do a lot more than it actually is doing. And what is worrying me, and you'll hear that when Lillian presents on some of the VAT measures, is that the whole purpose of the new VAT Act was to restrict the number of exemptions and zero rating, and the numbers actually going up every year again. So it won't be long before we're back to where we were pre-2013. So that seems to defeat the whole object. That said, you can see that over the last few years, so I've looked at 2010-11 up to 2014-15, there is, in all tax heads, there is an increase in collection. And the Revenue Authority is certainly continuing to collect well. It is increasing its collections annually. It is not, unfortunately, meeting target, but I put that down to what is perhaps an unrealistic target in what might not be the best of economic times. But I'll leave Ali Khan to talk about the economy as it is. So some quick facts just about East Africa, and I'm sorry, Burundi's just got cut off a little bit over there. Kenya remains the biggest economy with a GDP of about $61 billion. Burundi is down there at about 3.5. So you can see that the 5 countries have a very, very wide spread when it comes to GDP, and that's one of the reasons why I feel the East African community is not working as well as it might. And it's also one of the reasons why I was very pleased last year or the year before that they said they were going to defer the single currency, because I think the last thing we want to do is to get into a Eurozone type mess, which would happen with these numbers. The population, Tanzania has got the biggest population, almost 52 million. Tanzania has also got the highest GDP growth rate at 6.9%. Rwanda at 6.5. Rwanda 2-3 years ago was 8%, but I think they lost some of their aid funding, and that has had that effect of bringing this down slightly. Don't forget, you can see from there, Rwanda has a population of just 11 million people. So to achieve 6.5 is also a very good thing. Burundi, with all its problems, is actually showing negative growth. And that, I think, is going to continue for a little while. But looking at the projected expenditures, we are looking at $22.4 billion. So our budget is 2.26 trillion shillings. Biggest budget ever. But then, it's been the biggest budget ever for the last 4 years, because it's just going up and up and up and up every year. And my big worry about this is that what we're doing here, and we've got to address this sooner rather than later, is that we're expenditure budgeting rather than revenue budgeting. And that is why when we set our expenditure targets and then say this is the revenue we need to meet it, we're actually finding that we don't meet it, and the deficit is steadily expanding. So that's something that needs to be addressed. I do think we have to control government expenditure, which we're not doing very effectively. Just a couple of quick comments though. On the cosmetics, I got a question on social media. Does that mean that shampoo is going to be a bit more expensive? I had to respond that I don't know, because it doesn't really affect me.
There's no hair.
To make sure you're all awake. Okay, value-added tax in Uganda. I'm going to rush through these very quickly. You can ask questions later if you'd like to. There are now allowing VAT registration for petroleum midstream activities. There's some. This is because it's now going to become the big thing, the oil and gas industry. Some doubt as to what happens when they do this. Basically, they're saying voluntary registration. You can claim input, but how do you get it back? The law doesn't provide for the refund. So that's still a bit of a confusion there. Fluorescent and LED lamps, bulbs will now be subject to VAT. They've introduced a mechanism to eliminate VAT on donor-funded projects. input VAT on imported services for BPO companies is now claimable. In Uganda, you cannot claim reverse VAT on imported services, except now for if you're doing it for business process outsourcing. Solar power has now become a standard rated supply, which allows them to claim back input tax, so hopefully they'll be able to pass on some of the cost. VAT exemption on supplies to the geothermal and solar power. This is becoming common in the region. Everyone is actually seeing that. And they've expanded the list of agricultural processing equipment that are exempt from VAT. In Tanzania, some unprocessed agricultural product is now exempt from VAT. Water treatment chemicals are exempt, and various other things, bitumen, insurance services. Most tourism services now subject to VAT, which is interesting. We saw when we made tourism services subject to VAT here that it did actually put up the cost a lot for an inbound tourist. So I'm surprised that Tanzania has gone down that route, because I think it'll hit their tourism market quite a lot. On the income tax side, corporate tax, like everybody else around the world, and we did this last year, they've now introduced some law which gives you limitation of benefits and prevents you from using double tax treaties and shopping double tax treaties to get the best rate. This is all part of the global tax reset that you may have heard about, which the OECD is leading. You may have heard about the Google tax and all these things. So that's where this is coming from. There are revisions in presumptive income tax rates. Incidentally, one thing that Fred didn't mention was that the minister talked about, in our speech, presumptive income tax making a comeback in a bid to widen the tax net. It's very unclear to us how that's going to work, because it seems to me that if they're saying that they want to bring the informal sector in with presumptive income tax, bear in mind the informal sector tends to trade with the informal sector. So you're asking the thief to catch the thief, which I think won't actually happen in reality. Petroleum operations were expanded to include exploration, production, and midstream activities. Makes sense because they're ready to go into production once they give their production licenses. And in fact, I think the President Museveni, when he opened Parliament yesterday, said 2020 first oil. Incidentally, here I think they're talking about 2017, which seems a bit fast. But anyway, some alignment of the income tax act with the production sharing contracts. And on the personal tax side, resident nationals that are employed by diplomatic missions are subject now. It's confirmed that they're subject to Ugandan tax. Always made sense, really. I couldn't understand why they wouldn't be. In Tanzania, corporate tax, the capital gains tax on the disposal of shares by a non-resident shareholder controlling less than 25% of a Tanzanian resident entity. So that will also now trigger capital gains tax. Tanzania has always had this look-through where it doesn't matter who the ultimate shareholder is, they look through for the purposes of, or where the transaction is happening. If there are Tanzanian assets involved, there may well be Tanzanian capital gains tax. The lowest band of PAYE rate reduced from 9 to 11%. That was something that President Magufuli announced on the 1st of May, so they've put that into the law. And this was the greatest one I ever saw. MP's gratuity payment at the end of term now subject to PAYE. I think the more we tax our MPs, the better. But I remember saying to our CEO, Sami, that I should give up being a partner at Deloitte. I should go and become an MP, because it's the only job I know in the world where you don't even do anything, don't start working, nothing, and you raise your pay. So I was thinking of changing my vocation in life and becoming an MP, but I won't do it in Tanzania because it's obviously becoming more expensive for them there. Withholding tax in Uganda, they're introducing a 2% on shipping and air transport payments, 5% on qualifying international telecommunication services, and rent payments to non-residents are now subject to withholding tax. In Tanzania, withholding tax on rent and interest payments to retirement funds, and the Commissioner can now determine the minimum market value for the purposes of withholding tax on rental income. I can see this become, unless some sort of parameters are set, this is going to become a big dispute area, I think, in Tanzania. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was budget 2016 in the region. Rwanda and Burundi had very little. In fact, Burundi did their budget in February. They don't read it on the same day as us. Probably good for me, because analyzing 4 budgets and then having to do the 5th one is quite difficult and for the team here. So we're quite relieved that Burundi does it in a different day. I was sent on a WhatsApp group a billboard, a picture of a billboard which was found outside a Mexican restaurant. And it said, "Mexican food so authentic that even Donald Trump will build a wall around it." That was just to give you a thank you for listening to us, the team here.